I am, okay, all right, we've started recording. I'm going to go around and let these authors introduce themselves, and so excited to share their works with you and have a conversation about horror writing and inspiration and everything kind of in that range. And we'll start with Theresa.
Thank you. So my name's Theresa Halberson, and I can't say no to things. So I am an author, a podcaster, a publisher, and an editor. So I've got my podcast, Semi Sages of the Pages up. I've got my publishing company, No Bad Books Press, which my business partner is Sarah Faxon, who in this is next to me. I don't know if that works for everyone, but on my screen, she's over there. I've also written Warehouse Dreams, River City Widows. I edited Released, which is a horror anthology, and Sarah and I co-wrote Lost Aboard. It is a creative nonfiction piece about the ghosts that are on the Star of India, which is in the San Diego harbor. So that's me.
Awesome, thank you. Sarah, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, and thank you again for having us here today. My name is Sarah Faxon. I write by S. Faxon. I have authored The Animal Court, Foreign and Domestic Affairs, a collection of tiny short stories, horror short stories called Tiny Dreadfuls. Co-authored Lost Aboard with Theresa, co-edited the horror anthology Released, and I'm also, as she mentioned, the co-owner of No Bad Books Press and a fellow podcaster for the Semi Sages of the Pages, which is a writing podcast. And we are, I'm also the cover designer of all these you see here around me. It's a lot of fun and just love being a part of the Horror Writing Association.
Awesome, thank you, Sarah. Dennis, can you tell us about yourself?
Absolutely. Apparently, compared to Theresa and Sarah, I can say no to things because I don't do half of that stuff. My name's Dennis Crosby. I am the author of Death's Legacy, which was my debut novel, and the follow-up to that, Death's Debt, just came out last November. I write urban fantasy and horror. I have a couple of horror short stories out as well. One of which is in the Released anthology by No Bad Books Press. Thank you, Theresa and Sarah. The story that I have in there is actually a prequel to my novel. So if you're going to buy my books, you might want to pick up Release too, and it'll all tie together real nicely. Also pairs well with wine. And I also have a short story in the Castle of Horror anthology, volume 5. It is a horror homage, if you will, to Sanford and Son, just a horror take on that sitcom from the 70s. It was probably one of my favorite things to write. I do like the weird and the wacky. I get scared easily, but I can write it well, I think. At least I'm getting better at it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes up in my mind in the future.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Brae, tell us about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Thank you, Christina. I joined the Horror Writers Association a couple years back. I have multiple genres that I write in, from children's books to young adult epic fantasy, historical fiction, devotionals, and recently my horror thriller novel called The Embalmer, which has some Hollywood endorsements, and it was my first attempt in this genre, and it's doing really well. I'm excited to be involved in this and explore the horror universe and with you all and the others that are listening in. I'm the director of an organization called Kingdom Writers Association. It's a Christian organization where we help Christians write good stories, not crappy ones, but good ones. And so my Embalmer story is my attempt to help Christians write in those genres that they're afraid to write in. So, to really go for it. So I'm really excited to be here and to meet everybody and to learn from you guys as much as what I've got to release to you guys. So.
Awesome, thank you. So let's start at the beginning. maybe you guys could tell us a bit about what exactly first connected you with the horror genre. So not necessarily writing, but when did you first realize, hey, this is a genre I, really like, I'm interested in, I can see the potential. What sparked it? Was it a movie? Was it a story? Was it, radio program? And let's start with Theresa again.
So I've always really kind of preferred the more psychological and atmospheric horror. From the very beginning, there was this old Disney movie that I was obsessed with. It was called Watcher in the Woods, and it was very much, like, oh my gosh, what is that noise? And it was from the 70s. Everyone's nodding, so okay, thank goodness. It terrified me, but I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. How do I make this happen? Why is this scaring me so much? What is it about the atmosphere with this? And from then on, kind of that atmospheric horror really intrigued me. The Haunting of Hill House, I would have to say, is probably my all-time favorite TV show. Again, very psychological and very atmospheric. So yeah, that's what got me into it. Watcher in the Woods.
I love that one. And Disney has very kind of creepy stuff, especially growing up. I just Haunted Mansion and all of that. It was that fun kind of creepiness that I think resonated with a lot of people. Sarah, how about you?
I would have to pinpoint, if I could pinpoint anything, I would say my grandmother, who made Halloween the most fun day of the year. She would decorate the entire house inside and out. Our house was always the scariest in the neighborhood, and it was just so much fun. And I really specifically remember my grandmother, who was the sweetest woman in the world. Like, you would never suspect that she was so into Halloween and bringing it to life. I remember her ringing the doorbell and me going to go greet her, and she had this witch's mask on, and she just scared me. And I just laughed so hard as a kid. And I just remember the joy I felt from being scared, which is kind of counterintuitive, but it's that thrill we get when we're scared. And so that was probably what initially sparked the horror, the love of horror for me. But I also remember seeing my mom reading Anne Rice, Dean Koontz, Stephen King my entire childhood, watching The Twilight Zone, watching Are You Afraid of the Dark, and just really enjoying all those programs as a youngin'. And I kind of accidentally realized quite recently, like, oh, I'm a horror writer. Like, that's what I do. I write dark. This dark fantasy and horror is kind of what I do. So it's just always been a part of me.
That's funny that you say it didn't resonate with you immediately that you were a horror writer. I also had a similar experience, and I think maybe a lot of people do, because horror, sometimes you think just slasher, right? But actually it's that dark, creepy, atmospheric mood that we're talking about. And also, things ending badly often is horror. So I also came to that realization a few years ago that, okay, I write sci-fi fantasy, but it all ends kind of badly and darkly. So Dennis, how about you?
Oh man. So, horror, I think horror and I have this relationship like two cousins that meet for the first time at the age of 5, and then they don't see each other again until they're adults, and they hate each other as kids. They might see each other at a funeral or something, when they're 11, 16, and then when they're 24, they put away all that hatred and realize, maybe we actually kind of like each other. And that's what it was like for me. I saw The Exorcist when I was 5 years old. I should not have watched that movie, of course. I told my babysitter that I was asleep, and I watched it, through the corner of a blanket through a hole about this big, and she didn't realize I was awake until like the closing credits. And so that kind of set me up. And for a long time, I thought that horror was just this, as soon as you watch it, you're going to be up for days. You're not going to be able to sleep. And then, you might die in your sleep, and all these monsters are coming to get you. And I think as I got older, I realized more and more kind of what Theresa was talking about, like the psychological aspect of it is so fascinating. And that's the part that as a writer that you can really control. I have a degree in psychology. I'm fascinated by the human mind. And so the ability to create a world or an environment that really taps into, those unseen parts and kind of gets people thinking the what if, along that path of darkness. That's where I find it to be the most fun. And like Sarah, like eventually I realized, hey, I'm actually a horror writer. I started writing, my very first novel I started writing was a vampire novel. It was awful. But I didn't think of vampires as horror, until I started writing much later and started adding in those psychological pieces and making it, getting those connections to what the real world was. So yeah, that's my horror journey.
Great. I love that mention of the psychological aspect. It's so important to horror. Brae, how about you?
Mine would be situational horror. I mean, 1982, The Thing came out with John Carpenter, and that just, wow, like just the situationals that they were put in and the character development and the horror behind it. And then just really diving into the psychological part of it, that every point of view is the right point of view. So if even from The Thing, it was surviving on its own way to do things, although everyone else was very horrified by the way it would survive. So it just started really getting me thinking about storytelling, that from the viewpoint that everybody is trying to do the right thing from their viewpoint. And I love the situation that you get in The Shining, or The Exorcist. All of these type of movies are putting people in a situation and how do they respond to it. So I just love the humanity of it. I love moving into the thought process of these characters and letting the characters really go on their own, right? They get their own voice and they start taking over, and you just you set the playing field and just watch as the creativity flows. And I love to see where it goes. I think as a Christian, people are scared to go into letting your characters go, and they try to control their characters. And it might not just be Christians, but I've seen that with Christians, and we get that fluffy feel good ending, and it's not really required because there's not always a happy ending. There's always horrific things that have happened, even in our own lives. And how do we respond to those types of things? So yeah, The Thing, The Shining, and Exorcist really set me ablaze in that thought process.
Good stuff. So the next question is, when did you first know you wanted to be a writer? And for a lot of people, this is sort of decoupled from knowing you like horror. So I'm curious, was there a moment? Was it sort of gradual? Was it the first publication? And I love this question because it's so different for each writer, but there's also a lot of similarities often. So Theresa, let's start with you again.
So I think, like so many people, I fell into a love of writing because I love reading so much. And, as a child, you start reading and then you start being like, oh my gosh, what would it be like to go into this world? What would it be like to go into Oz? That was my favorite thing. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, somebody wrote this book and got paid for it. I want to do that. That sounds awesome and amazing. So that's honestly where it came from, where I was like, can I do that, please? Because that sounds cool.
Were you a certain age when that happened, or was it kind of?
Oh, like 6.
Pretty early.
Yeah. But it's so interesting because my love for writing or my plans to be an author really kind of went up and down, kind of depending on I don't know if I can make a career at that, your self-confidence. It doesn't take much as a child. It takes a teacher who's trying to help to, have the red marks all over the paper, and you go, well, that dream died. So it really wasn't until adulthood that I was like, okay, I would like to try this now, please. So yeah.
Sarah, how about you?
I had a writing assignment in 3rd grade to come up with a story. And it was, what I ended up producing was called 3 Cool Cats. And it was about these 3 cats who had an oppressive Doberman as their overlord. and they poisoned him and threw him out. And for whatever reason, I wasn't put in therapy for this, but it was my first story, and I loved it. And I've been writing ever since. And I remember doing a lot of comic strips when I was a kid. Even I think before that, just this idea of developing a story. And I think it was an eagle and a horse, like Igor and Carmel, if I remember it correctly. And it was just, these silly little stories of their adventures. But then I got lazy and I was like, I don't want to draw all this. And so that's where I picked up the pen and started going from there.
Awesome. I think I have to say, at least for me, I had a lot of great English teachers that encouraged creative writing. And I'm so grateful to them because I feel like that really helped me figure out that I enjoyed writing, that it was released, that it was fun. Even with the red marks, still got enough positive feedback that I felt excited by it. So just, yeah, very grateful to those teachers. Dennis, how about you?
For me, I think it grew out of laziness, as weird as this sounds, because I know how hard we work on creating, short stories and novels. But I remember being in 6th grade and, halfway through the first part of the year and, having yet another week of vocabulary words that I have to write now 20 sentences for to show that I know what the word means. I went to my teacher and I said, can I write like a story instead and use all the words in the story? And he said, if you can use them correctly, go for it. And I went with that. I took those 20 vocabulary words and I wrote like 2 paragraphs, which in hindsight, it would have been easier to probably just write the 20 sentences, but whatever. But the ability, I think, to create a story with 20 words and get good feedback on it, it helped me understand that there's all these creative thoughts that I had were I could channel that. I could really get something out of that, and that kind of began my love of writing. I don't know that I really wanted to, become a writer or try to pursue becoming a novelist until probably college. And even then, I wasn't certain. I mean, I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't know anything about the craft. I knew nothing about the business. And, telling people that I was going to write a book was just kind of to tell people I was going to write a book to seem interesting. Eventually, I convinced myself that I could actually do it and wanted to do it. And I got serious about the craft, I'd say maybe a decade or so ago, a little over that. And once I started to learn more about it and really appreciate it and respect it, now I can't think of wanting to do anything other than that, just creating stories, creating worlds, and entertaining people.
Great. And Brae, when did you realize you wanted to be a writer?
Yeah, it's funny because all of us have had this experience where it's almost like someone spoke into our lives, someone encouraged us, and that really set us ablaze. That really, caught our interest, right? So as little children and in our, teenage years, we're working on who are we? What is our identity? What is our purpose here? What am I called to do? And it was 10th grade for me. My English teacher, I was failing English, had a short story contest, and I love telling stories. So I wrote a short story called Fancy Feast. It was a horror. And The Thing was really my premise for building off of that movie, The Thing. And it won out of all the students. She couldn't read it in front of the class because she said it was horrific and gross. But the content, the story is what won. And when she gave me those accolades, when I actually heard those things, it pierced my heart to say, wow, that's what I want to do. I mean, here I am, a teenager in 10th grade, trying to figure things out. My parents are drug dealers, and we're dealing with all of these things and these hurts in our lives. And, I'm just this hippie kid and, getting beat up because my name's Brae and, just all the things that you go through. And then you have a teacher pick you out, even in a class that you're failing. And because you just don't understand, or I just don't want to follow the rules. I was a rebel. I didn't know God at that point. I was an atheist in most regards, but to hear her pull my name out and say I won, and that is what sparked everything in my life. And honestly say that's the turning point for my storytelling career. And now having 11 published books, won awards, and traveling around and speaking, it's just crazy to see where God has brought me here in this point. And even now, just talking to you guys, and I never thought I would be, talking in front of a panel of other horror novelists and enthusiasts, and what a blessing. So,
Oh, that's so powerful, and speaks to the importance of teachers for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love this next question because this also is so different for everyone. It's what inspires your stories, be it moments, people. Where do you kind of get the ideas that either currently you're working on, or maybe your past publications? Where do those come from? Theresa.
I get to ask this question a lot, and I always feel terrible with this answer. I don't know. I seriously don't. Sometimes they come from dreams, but usually I'm just like, hey, I had an idea. That's a really good idea. I should write that down. And then I just go with it from there. I actually have a very, very long idea list because, and I keep it in Google Docs because I have access to it from my phone. And it's like a light bulb that goes off, and I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea. And I can tell because when I write it down, I'll usually, if I have the time and the kind of the space to do it, it'll usually be like a good paragraph or two of like, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And then I'll usually look over that when I'm ready for a new story and be like, okay, that's a good story. Let me go ahead and tug on that. I don't generally have a problem with inspiration or ideas or anything else. I have too many, actually. So
it's a good problem to have. Is there a certain activity or place where you find you get more of these ideas? Like
no, I mean, it's all over the place. It can be driving, which can be fun when all of a sudden you're like, okay, I have to wait until a stoplight to try to write that down. It can be walking. It can be in the middle of work. It's everywhere and anywhere. It just comes to me, and nothing triggers it. Almost sometimes like somebody will say something and then that'll trigger it, or I'll see something, but most of the time it's just.
It's a good problem to have. Sarah, how about you?
It really just depends. I would say Origins, which is my upcoming dark fantasy book that's coming out, came from a conversation with Theresa. We were talking about the bizarre alien romance and shape-shifting fads that were happening a couple months ago. And she just happened to say dragon shapeshifters, and my mind exploded. And I had the entire origin story for the Blue Dragon Society, which is the next series I'm about to do. And my mind was racing 100 miles a minute. And I was like, okay, this meeting has to end because I need to write. And sorry, Teresa. And it's just different things like that. I mean, another book that I have ahead, The Complex, that was based on me just dealing with 2020 and a lot of things that happened in that year. And it's my processing therapy book. There were so many different things happening that I was actually able to draw a lot of real life situations. And not necessarily just about, the shutdowns and everything, but just the day-to-day things I was going through as the world was shutting down and the incredible conversations that were happening around me. So that I drew a lot of inspiration from. But mostly my inspiration comes from dreams, or when I'm trying to just zone out and relax in the shower, which is where it is impossible to write. And so that tends to be where most of my ideas happen. And then I have to really commit them to memory.
I feel you. Dreams and shower are two big ones for me also. It's very inconvenient.
Right.
Dennis, tell us about your iconic character and where she came from. What was the inspiration?
For me, it's both my books are heavily influenced by my love of Greek mythology. but they're also influenced by my work in social service. And so I tie in a lot of the real experiences that I've had with clients who, struggle with depression, with substance abuse, with serious psychological disorders. I could tie those pieces in so that the characters become a little bit, more real to the reader. People can connect with them a bit more. The other influence for me, typically a couple things happen when I think of a story idea. I think of the title of the story or the book first, and then I have kind of a rudimentary idea about what the story is going to be, but I often interview my characters. I will ask questions and then answer them as if I am the character. And so, a great deal of that influence of the story then comes from the characters. It comes from the protagonist, from the antagonist, and from a couple of like key supporting players, not necessarily everybody. But all of those pieces kind of go together and really set the stage for what I'm going to write next.
I like that tactic. Do you interview just the protagonist or other characters also?
No, I'll typically do the protagonist. Oftentimes, I did this with book one. I didn't do it so much with book two, but I'll interview the antagonist, whoever the main big bad is. I really want to understand what it is that motivates them.
Mm.
And if you've got that piece, you can also make them very real. You don't just want, someone who's evil for the sake of being evil. You want to know why, what drives them. And so for the first book, I did that intensely. The second book, I did not do that, but that's also because, my primary antagonist is a little bit, there's a lot of mystery behind who she is. And so I'm keeping some of that even a mystery for myself. But yeah, I think it's really just the key players. That's what I want to know, what's driving them, what's motivating them through this story.
Interesting. Brae, how about you? What inspires you?
That's so good, Dennis. I love that. I love your point of view, just getting to the root, like not letting people be evil just to be evil, and what's their motivation is huge. I just love that angle. I write what I know and then make up the rest. And what I mean by that is, like, as authors, everything that we write, there's a lot of truth hidden in there. Like each character has a little bit of us in there, and nobody knows that except for us. So we write from those truths based off of our experiences, based off of what we've seen, heard, taste, touch, and felt. And so this is something that I call plundering the darkness. And so when we go into those dark things that have happened to us personally, whether it be, rape, molestation, there's, suicide or drugs or abuse, and all of these negative things that have circulated around in our lives, whatever those dark things are, we can pull from our own experiences and actually make these characters real. Like they are real, even in a fictional setting. And then, of course, we embellish and we make up, or we blend truths together, right? And so that's my motivation of creating characters. And so one time I was visiting my ex-son-in-law was a mortician, and he brought me into his work. And I got to see these dead bodies and, go around the whole embalming process and see this. And this was years ago, probably a decade ago. I started getting this question, like, what if an embalmer raises somebody from the dead at work? And, I'm like, well, that's an interesting story, but it's not enough. Right. And so it's just something I've been kicking around. We get these ideas. And we go, it's just not enough. It's not ready. It needs to percolate. It needs to simmer. It needs some more ingredients in there. And so the years went by, and another question came up saying, what if this embalmer raises somebody from the dead, and that person he raised from the dead was a serial killer that nobody caught, and he died of natural causes? Whoa. Now you've got, I'm like, okay, this is something I can work with, but it's still not enough. Like, what do we do with that? And then the thing that really hit me was the third question. This just came to me 2 years ago, was what if that serial killer that he raised from the dead was the same serial killer that killed the embalmer's 5-year-old daughter 2 years prior, and it ruined his life, his marriage. He's just encompassed with trying to find this, blaming himself for his daughter's death, and just going through all the emotions and the anger and the humanity. And that's where the Embalmer story came from. And so that's the interesting part, where we can just dive into the darkness, ask questions, and then just let things start evolving, and let those characters really take over and let them go through the true emotions. Like, I mean, what would you do if your daughter was killed, or, a loved one was killed by a serial killer? How would you act? How would you respond? And, and it's not all, roses and unicorns. So.
I love that. That is such a great way of illustrating how to build a premise, right? How to build a story. It also speaks to what I think is a little more unique to the horror genre, which is that you really do need to face the truth, maybe more so than other genres, if you're trying to get that authentic experience. Whether it's scaring someone, whether it is mining those like darker places, it entails a level of honesty that you don't necessarily need with other genres. So I think that also makes it very interesting. So thank you. That was a great answer. And the next question kind of ties in nicely, and it is, what are the reoccurring themes and motives in your writing? And why do you explore those themes, whether consciously or unconsciously? So, Theresa.
So like Dennis, I have a degree in psychology, so I always really enjoy exploring those themes and going deep. I write very deep first-person point of view. And I really enjoy writing very flawed characters. Warehouse Dreams, my main character, Kendall, she sees herself as a hero, and she is in many ways, but with that comes a little bit of substance abuse, overworking herself, a huge anxiety, a level of depression, some suicidal tendencies with that too, as she works to help protect the kids that she's fighting society to save. River City Widows has Tasia. She's a character who is recovering from her husband's death 2 years ago. And her way of recovering from that is to be extremely controlling. She has every little thing like written down and controlled. She has lists and everything else. And so when it turns out her house is haunted, a ghost obviously is not going to follow any of her lists or any ways of controlling. So she has to address that within herself. And, naturally, of course, there's a romance. And once she's able to kind of, get a little bit more flexible, that allows that romance to blossom as well. So I really like the flawed characters that are just dealing with something and just trying to come out on the other end of it.
Sarah, how about you?
I also like to write really true characters. I mean, with Origins, my main character is a dragon who can shapeshift into humans, which sounds almighty and powerful and all this and that. But he's really just an awkward teenager who gets bested by chickens and just has all these. He's supposed to be doing a mission, but he, at the end of the day, is still awkward around girls and is just trying to be accepted by his community and doing what he can to just be accepted. So that's a big theme of Origins, is just trying to find your place in society and realizing maybe that's not the society I want to be a part of, and being involved in groups and cliques and making a found family. And that's a big part of a lot of my stories, is the found family. And that's something I like returning to a lot, because I think a lot of times we find ourselves feeling very alone or very isolated, and realizing or not realizing soon enough that we actually do have a group around us, and maybe they're friends, but they're our family. And so I like that idea of redefining what a family means, and that it can be of any shape or any diversity or whatever it is, as long as you feel at home with those people and comfortable and safe. And so that's something I like returning to a lot, even in my darker stories. In The Animal Court, the main character Gertrude has an abusive father and is trying to rise up through the ranks of the political society and has to be perfect all the time. But she is not perfect by any stretch. She has a bad temper. She has a little something going on in the closet and is just trying to get by and realizing, oh, this isn't what's right for me. This is a better fit for what I actually am supposed to be doing. And so, those themes of realizing this is what I wanted my path to be. This is what I thought it should be, but this is where I'm supposed to be. And this is where I'm safe and happy.
I love the found family themes. I think, especially for maybe people who grew up feeling a little outcast or awkward, that feels especially powerful. Dennis, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, recurring themes, I probably see two primary themes, and that is questions of immortality, because I am obsessed with the notion. And I'm obsessed with the notion because of category 2, which is fear. And, my primary fear is fear of death, which is why I think I've gravitated toward these stories, because at least in these stories, I can control, aspects of death. I can control the understanding of it and what it means. I think in all of my novels, there are and will be characters that overcome certain fears. And where they're not overcoming their fears, the author is overcoming his fear. In the short story that I wrote for Released, there's a scene that I wrote in which a character is being, attacked and bombarded by spiders. And I have like severe arachnophobia. I do not tolerate anything with more than 2 legs and hair and all the, I don't do them. I love Spider-Man, mind you, but this great movie, great character, love him to death. Peter, you're my man. But all your little cronies, I can't deal with the spiders. But writing that scene was somewhat cathartic in the sense that I could control that. I could control the fear of it. And even in thinking about it and kind of writing what the individual was experiencing as the spiders were like swarming over, and it was a lot to take, but it was necessary for me to overcome. And so my characters are going to do the same. They're going to overcome their fears. My main character, Cassidy Simmons, in my first 2 novels, she's got a great deal of fear. She's got a traumatic past. She doesn't know, in the first book, doesn't know where she comes from. By the end of it, she learns where she comes from. And now in the second book, she's got to really reconcile that. What does that mean? Why do I have the audacity to think that I can do these things or that I should do these things? So it's now fear. It's that imposter syndrome. It's something that, a lot of writers face. Who are we to think that someone's going to want to read our story? Those are the types of things that I will have in my novels, in my stories. I want, again, my characters to represent the people that are reading them, and we all have those fears inside of us. We all want to try to learn how to overcome them, or at least, manage the impact of the fears. And if the characters are doing that in a very real way, it helps people connect more. It helps people realize that, yeah, my character has a hand that can turn into a sickle, but she also drinks bourbon and Vicodin to get through a rough day. It's blending that magic and that fantastic with what is very, very real for people.
I'm glad you mentioned the cathartic moment too with the spiders, because that is such a big part of horror, right? And why people read it is for that catharsis, to face the worst and get through it.
Absolutely.
Even if the character doesn't, at least
if I could type end, I'm good.
Brae, how about you?
Yeah, Dennis, it's like those people are reading the book and going through those horrific scenes, but
Yes.
even though the characters don't live through it or they get a horrific ending, they still survive. So
Yeah.
it's, like they're still getting through it, and they're ready for the Vicodin and the glass of wine right after reading it. So. Mine is really about destiny and purpose. I like those type of themes for my books. Really ask those questions of, why am I here in this world? Why was I created? What is my purpose? And what am I destined for even after this life? So those are the things. As a pastor, I get that a lot from people coming to me saying, what am I here for? What's the point of life? So when I'm writing my stories, I really focus on those type of motifs and themes of destiny and purpose, and just exploring the characters, letting the characters go where they need to go, whether they turn to God or not. That's not my job. You just present what I know and believe to be true, and let the characters decide on their own. Much like we each have our own decision to make, I let my characters make those decisions, not me force it upon my characters, because then when my readers read it, it feels forced. And we've read a lot of books where we're like, man, I just don't think that's the character. The character wouldn't do that. And I can't stand it. So I want things to go the way they need to go. And it might not be, a good ending. But it'll be the appropriate ending. And so that's where I go.
It's a great parallel to real life as well. And
yeah,
letting people grow. So we're making pretty good time. I'm going to combine the last two questions just so we have time for any audience questions if there are any. So the last two are, okay, there's three. I'm going to combine the last two, but before that, let's do what is your favorite thing about writing horror? And Theresa.
Probably scaring myself. No, I mean, I know I'm writing well when I scare myself and I'm like, okay, I'm going to turn on all the lights. And that's my favorite part.
It's a good sign. Sarah, how about you?
I agree with that. There were times when I was writing the Blue Dragon Society, which is my next one, and the Complex, where I would write something, I'd be like, oh my God, what did I just write? Am I going to be able to sleep after this? Where is this coming from? What depths of my brain, or what part of me is this? And funny enough, I wanted to say something about what Brae had said about how sometimes we control our characters too much, and we don't let them go to that full darkness. And that was one of the comments Theresa had made about the Complex. And so in the new scenes that I've been doing with the villain, I went as dark as you can go. And that was probably one of the scariest points for me, where I was like, oh my God, what did I just write? And then smiling to myself, being like, yeah, I just wrote that. I mean, it's just, it's just such an interesting game, because it goes back to my grandma scaring me and me being terrified for a moment, but then laughing and just writing that joy of, I survived this thing.
Interesting. I think horror lets you do that more than other types of writing again sometimes, like just to go in a place you maybe didn't expect it, and how that can be very satisfying as a writer. Dennis, how about you?
For me, I think it's the ability to control and to learn. I can control the intensity. I can control as much as I can without, the characters stepping, because they are going to tell me what's right and what's wrong. Kind of like what Brae was saying, you have to be true to the character as well. You can't force something in there that they would not do. I remember writing a scene in which Cassidy had, a 9mm. I'm like, she doesn't use guns. Why would you even put a gun in the house?
Right.
So you control it to a certain extent, but through that, I'm able then to learn more about my fear and then control my response to it. And I think that kind of helps me with other aspects. It just, I go through life and work, especially the day job, saying everything is fixable. And, you have to realize that, in a world like this that you're creating, you have to still keep that mentality. there might be something that seems insurmountable happening in the story, but it doesn't mean you can't find a way to overcome it. And so, yeah, being able to really control certain aspects and then learn, more about how I would respond to something like that. Yeah, that's the big thing for me.
Yeah, it's sort of like hopeful, like your points of hopefulness.
Yeah.
Brae, how about you?
That's good stuff. I love everybody's answers. I love this genre because there really seems to be no barriers, no blocks to it, other than if you put your own blocks in place as an author. But it's an area you can really explore. And I don't want to write horror just for the shock and awe of writing horror. We have some people out there who just want to write horrific stuff just because, and you're just like, okay, that's really gross, but where's the story in it? What's the point of this? And so I always want to have a point or a direction, a purpose, and to write the story, and not for horror's sake, but just to tell the story straight up, what it is and what happens. And if there's horror in it, there's horror in it. If there's not, there's not. I don't need to add to it or embellish it. It's just, this is what happens based off of these scenarios where you put these characters in interesting situations, and how do they respond or react to it, to the best of your ability as a writer and an author, to let your characters explore and you explore with them. And how many times we've looked at our own work and we've written it and we read it and we're like, wow, who wrote this? Like, there's something that just is flowing through us, right? And where that creativity comes from, and we're just letting it go. Like, let's not hold back the bullets in the gun. Let's unload, and really let her rip, tater chip kind of thing, and have fun while we're doing it, and like I'm wearing my shirt, I am a writer, and I make the voices in my head work for me. So let's make those voices that are, kicking the can around in our heads, like, let's let them work for us. And when we're in the shower, when we're driving, when we're sleeping, those are the places that we get a lot of ideas, and they're not the best times, but timing wise. And but we get out of the shower, we do our best to write those notes down, or we have a recorder in the shower. This is what happens. Okay. So we have to find ways to not forget the storytelling process that comes through, but that's what I enjoy.
It's a great point about shock horror. There's a place for it. It can be fun, but the horror that resonates the most seems to be that kind of deeper level, following the characters, that kind of more intense truth telling. Okay, last question, two-parter. What horror content have you recently enjoyed? This could be a book, a movie, TV show you'd like to recommend to the audience. And then is there an existing horror series or franchise you'd love to write for or reboot? It could be one and the same answer or two separate answers. So Theresa.
Oh, I needed time to think on this one. For like TV show, movie, that type of thing, I really did enjoy, as I mentioned before, The Haunting of Hill House, and Midnight Mass was also excellent too. Same creators, same writers, and everything else. So highly recommend both of those. For a franchise or something I'd like to reboot, nothing's coming to mind.
Or maybe write a spin-off story for a world that you really enjoy. That would be like super fun to dive into. Nothing really horror related, unfortunately. I have always wanted to write, and I can, because it's out there. I mean, the copyright, it's open to do that. But I have always wanted to play around with the world of Oz, the land of Oz. I could make that horror, because there is definitely some horror elements in that. So. You never know. Actually, I am going to write that down. So, yeah, that's my answer. That's awesome. Sarah, how about you?
I love the Conjuring series. The the Lorraine Warren. Lorraine Warren and her husband, Ed, I believe, were real live demonologists, and they saw some stuff. And I've just been fascinated with them, even before their stories became a franchise, when they were just on a documentary on whatever it was, AMC or something. And I've always been fascinated by the study of demonology and these evils that exist among us. And one movie that really inspired me, kind of along the same lines, was the movie Constantine. And I love that story so much. I could watch it anytime. And I think I actually have drawn a lot of inspiration from that for my Blue Dragon Society series, where demons live among us and people are very aware of them and have to learn how to live with them, live for them, or fight them. And so I think I've kind of taken that one by the reins a little bit, but I would love to write a part of that series of, in our modern context, of dealing with demons and angels and figuring out how to deal with both of them.
Yeah.
Very cool. Dennis, how about you?
For me, I haven't seen anything too recently. I'd say a few months ago, I watched Train to Busan, and I thought that was absolutely phenomenal. It's so good, and it's one of those things. Again, it's got that psychological element. So you've got these, zombies that are after you, but you've also got to think about yourself and saving yourself and your child and all the people. And you go to, what would you do in this situation if you're running and somebody trips and falls? Are you going to run back and get them, or are you going to keep going? So there's a lot of those questions, I think, that come up in that, kind of really tests who you are as a person. So yeah, I thought that was really phenomenal. And in terms of what I would write or reboot, I absolutely love the Supernatural TV series. I cannot, when it first came out, I thought it was going to go two ways, either be too campy or too weird for me. And so I didn't write it or watch it until maybe it was maybe 6 or 7 season ends. And then I just binged every season, and I was a fan from that point. So I would absolutely love to write a story in that world. I think there's a lot of fun. I've taken a lot of influence from that series in my books and in my stories. But yeah, I think I love the characters that are in it. I love, the grittiness of it. And you can have some real dark fun in that world.
Yeah.
Good one.
So good.
Right?
I think the most recent thing that I kind of watched was the Squid Games. Gosh, putting people in that type of situation and watching them react. I mean, same to the Train to Busan. It's just interesting to see.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy. You're just like, whoa, okay, we're in it. Wow. It's like shock. And then you're like, okay, I can't stop watching this train wreck, It's like, I can't look away. It's so I love that aspect, but I don't know about anything I'd write other than I'd like to explore some of the darker sides of even what we find in scripture in the Bible. I think in the Bible, when you read through it, I think every genre is represented in that one book, and there's some horrific stuff in there. And I'd love to write about that. Maybe see a Netflix series. Let's go to a darker angle of what people have done. I mean, even, Herod sending his military to kill babies, how the PTSD would go. Let's explore that character as a warrior going into that, following orders and killing children. That's horrific. And, what does that happen, and how does that person react to that situation? And so I'd love to see and write for that kind of stuff.
That's a good idea too.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Jessica, did any questions come in? I think we probably have time for one or two, maybe one. Or do you have any questions?
I don't see any questions, but maybe people weren't looking at the chat. So if anyone has a question, I guess feel free to like unmute yourself if you don't see the chat and see any comments. And if in like a moment or two you don't, I have a question.
We could start
We'll
with
give
your
people a chance.
question.
Okay. Yeah, so just what advice, you probably get asked this a lot, what advice would you give for anyone who is just starting to write horror and doesn't know what they're getting into, but is excited?
Who wants to tackle that one?
I think I'll just say, I always ask the why. Why are you, what's your why? What motivates you to go into horror? Some people I think don't necessarily have to write horror, or maybe it's another genre that has horrific things in it. There's, you can cross pollinate multiple genres, but don't get stuck saying, oh, I need to write horror, because you almost force yourself. Just tell your story the best that you can and just let it go. And then you can surmise based off of where you're going that this would be in a caliber of a horror. Or is it more of a thriller, or is it both a horror thriller, or, whatever it is, an adventure that's got horrific scenes in it. So just tell your story and be you fully alive as you go through the process.
I would also add a couple things. Take what you love the most, take what you fear the most, and mash them up. Put those things together and see what kind of crazy fun you can have. For me, like I said, death is something that I am afraid of. Greek mythology is something that I love. So I'm putting those pieces together and creating this world that Cassidy lives in. So I would take those two elements, find out, just kind of be honest with yourself about what it is you fear the most. And when you're writing it, realize that you're putting that out there. It can be a scary thing in and of itself to share that fear with the world. But be honest with yourself, be comfortable in that, and, take the piece that you love and put those things together.
I'd also add to just challenging yourself, because it goes back to that we put our own constraints on the characters. I really, really love that, what Brae said, because you're going to want to write something dark and scary, but go to the darkest, scariest thing. What is the absolute worst that could happen? And, really pushing yourself to go there and go into those dark spaces. And when I wrote my short story for Released, I wrote a slasher, which I have never done before. I really don't like slashers. They gross me out, but I wanted to challenge myself and asked myself, okay, why don't I like them? Because they're freaking scary. And okay, so let's jump on that. And that was one of those things that I really touched on, like what Dennis was saying too, about tapping into your own fears and riding that wave and just letting loose.
Yeah, that's good.
And then I will add, know your characters and know what scares them, and try to tap into that. Figure out what your characters, and there's different words for this, but the most common one is fatal flaw. Figure out what that is, and if you can tie that into the horror genre somehow, that's going to really, really add wonderful nuances and layers to your story.
That's good.
We're exactly at time. Any last thoughts, questions?
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
I'm excited to read everyone's work. I'm excited. This is great. Love it.
Been a blast.
Yes, and thanks again to the Escondido Library for hosting the San Diego HWA chapter. Our links are in the chat.
Thank you so
much. Jessica, anything else we need to? This recording will be available, right? Or
yes. Yeah, I'm going to upload it. Probably like next week. It'll be all up and ready for people to watch, and we'll post about it on social media too, so everyone knows they can watch it if they missed it live.
Yeah,
and the chat is all the links to you guys and to the chapter and the Twitter, so people can stay up to date on all the fun stuff that you're doing. Oh, a message. Oh, she's thank you, Nicole. I got so excited. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're so grateful that you partnered with us to bring this wonderful conversation to our community. And we hope that we maybe kind of got rid of some misconceptions about horror, because I think a lot of people think, oh, slasher, that's all horror is. But I
Right.
really enjoyed your conversation and kind of revealing that there's different layers, and it's a much more complicated genre and more kind of fun genre than I think a lot of people realize. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you all.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
I'm going to stop the recording.